Hi, Steffi here from The Makers. This particular tutorial is specially for our Nutcracker, and it shows you some of the stitches, embroidery stitches, that you will need to make to decorate his little coat and his hat, and also his shoes. So I will be covering today a chain stitch which goes all the way around the outside of his coat, including the sleeves, and then he's got the chain stitch here on top of his hat as well. I will also show you how to make a long stitch, and that will show you how to make the belt buckle, the surround here for the decorations. I will show you how to do a cross stitch, that is to do his shoelaces here. And finally, or in fact I start with that first, is how to make these loops on his lapels. And if you are using the instructions, then I'm going slightly off piste with that one, because we're actually attaching them before we attach the lapels to his coat. So let's start straight away. Start with the lapel. So I've needle felted the little disc here, and I've made a start, but you basically knot your thread underneath, and then you make the first loop by going in and making a loop. You decide how long, but once you start making the loops, try and keep them the same, and then you're going and making another stitch. Try and keep this as underneath the lapel as possible, and the second stitch you will have to pull tight, and that second stitch, that smaller stitch, will stop the loop to be pulled at any point. So then you're going to make a loop again, like this. Don't know why my thread is slightly, I'm just going to thread that needle again in case I've missed one of the strands. You are doing 6 strands, all 6 strands on your needle, and so that's my loop now. Make sure that's the same length. Then I'm going to make just a little stitch, pull that tight, because that means that my loop is now secure. Make another loop, and you want that loop to be same length as the others. So I use my needle to sort of straighten them out, and then you make another stitch, keep the little stitches as tucked away as possible, and then you make another loop, and you work your way all the way around. Now I've got quite a lot of loops here, you don't need quite that many, and when you've worked your way all the way around, then you're going to attach it to your Nutcracker by felting it onto the top. And that, I think, is a simpler way than embroidering it whilst the lapel is on his shoulder. Right, then we're moving on. So chain stitch. Chain stitch, you start off by having the thread knotted up and have it coming through from the underneath, and you make your first stitch, and imagine this is your first stitch. You go along, and you want to now straight away catch that loop. So go in there and then you're going straight back into that chain. So you're going into that same, let me just make our camera a bit closer up so you can see it a little bit better. Here we go. So I'm going straight into that same hole again, and then along, and as soon as I've got a chain here, a loop here, I'm going to catch it with my needle, and I'm going to repeat this, going into that same hole, along, and now I can see my loop and I catch it. And you know that you've done the right stitch when you can unravel your chain stitch like this. You know that you've done the right stitch when you can literally unravel it like knitting. Then you know you've done a chain stitch. Moving on to the cross stitch. I've done a couple of crosses here. So again, you start from the underneath, all 6 strands of the embroidery thread, and you will need that stitch for the Nutcracker's shoelaces. and you go in. Now I think it's easier to do every stitch individually rather than going in and out at the same time. So do a diagonal stitch and then do another stitch just below and cross the first one over. So show you this again. Do one diagonal stitch, so going over, slightly up and across, and then you start at the same level as the first stitch and you're going across in the opposite direction. And that is your cross stitch for your shoelaces. And then showing you how to do the long stitch here with my thread is probably the simplest of them all, and there's different ways of getting that square done for the buckle but also for the decoration. So you can go through your work and then make one line like this, and now I'm already doing the second line. So I'm actually, because it's such an easy stitch, you can predict where you need to go next. So I'm running out of thread here, but it is a really simple stitch. Now you can go over this again, or you can make the stitches doubled up to start with. That's entirely up to you, but it is a really simple stitch. Now this one is a herringbone stitch that I'm doing next. It's actually almost like a V-stitch on its side that you're using for the Nutcracker. And of course you can use different stitches, you don't have to stick to those. So you go in, diagonally down, and then you go do the same in mirror image. This is how I do it. However, you could also just do diagonal stitches, working your way along, and then add the other diagonal stitches in a second row. I like doing them like in one go. And that is basically all the stitching complete. I think the most complicated stitch is probably the chain stitch. So I will show you this again. I'm just going to pull the thread through. So you have your thread coming from underneath, and go in there again and then go along. Now this is creating a loop. You catch that loop, and the most important thing is that you're now going back inside that loop along, and before you pull it through, because you will just pull it through the loop, you catch it with your needle. So what you've got to make sure of is that you don't twist that loop. So make sure it is a neat straightened out loop when you go and catch it with your needle, and so that looks like a chain. That stitch makes it look like a chain, and it works really well for the Nutcracker's detail here on his hat, and also on the sleeve, and going all the way around his coat tails. Hopefully that was useful for the Nutcracker, and yes, let's do it. See you soon.